Good morning and welcome to the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. We are excited to have you with us today. My name is Melissa Legowski. I'm the founder, CEO, and queen bee at Big Buzz. We are excited to talk about the head and heart in strategic collaborations today. When I was first an executive director, I know that everybody seemed to operate from a scarcity mindset and this notion of competition for available resources. And I just think we are in a wonderful, wonderful time where collaboration has never been more meaningful and abundant, and that there are lots of opportunities for that. So I am super excited to be able to bring this topic to our audience this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be shared with you post-event via email. Please do put any questions you have in the Q&A box as we go. We will be, usually we answer them at the end, but today we're going to be trying to intersperse them with the speakers as we go to make sure we are kind of addressing things in real time at each point. And then please do adjust your closed captioning as you desire in your controls. If this is your first time with Big Buzz Idea Group, we want to just let you know a little bit about us. And we do know that many nonprofits lack the time, staff, skills, and the funding that they need to really thrive. Big Buzz fills gaps in management, marketing, and event services so that you can focus on the big picture and position your organization for greater sustainability and higher success. We have a grand unveiling this morning before I turn it over to our guests. And next month's Breakfast Club is taking a little bit of a different twist. We have been talking for years at Big Buzz about doing a summit for our nonprofit friends about many of the core elements in running your organization like a business. So in March, we are going to be launching Running Your Nonprofit Like a Boss, and it will be held at DePaul University from 9:30 to 2:30. We will be covering some of the key elements in having a successful business. We will be going over best practices in HR, in finances, in strategy, in leadership development, and being able to collaborate and workshop some of the items throughout the day with other nonprofit colleagues. So we are, ticket sales are going live today. It is $149 for the day, and that includes your lunch, and we would love to have you join us. Without further ado, I am super excited to introduce our friends, Judy Carabeau, who is Chief Collaborations Officer at Mission Plus Strategy, and Greg Peterson, who is CEO of Keystone Alliance. They have been doing amazing work in the collaborative space, and I am happy to turn the floor over to them at this time.
Thank you, Melissa, for inviting us to speak to your Big Buzz Breakfast Group. It's wonderful to be here. I hope everybody has coffee in hand. I know I do. Greg, I don't know if you've got coffee in hand, but I think we're ready to start. So we're going to be talking today about strategic collaborations and really I think more so now than ever, like Melissa said, thinking about collaborations is critically important. I mean, if you think about the headlines, some of the recent headlines have been that a 15-year-old boy was wounded overnight in the South Side. There's, major storms going on in Southern California. There's the financial crisis that recently hit Heartland Alliance. There's rallies around immigration in Chicago. All of these are really big issues that are bigger than any one nonprofit. And so really for us to be able to address these important big social issues, we need to use a collaborative strategy to be able to address some of these big issues. Both Greg and I love this quote, if I can move the slide here. Collaboration is not for the faint of heart. It is purposeful action where partners are seeking to accomplish more together more than they would be able to accomplish on their own. So the theme for today, the focus for today is going to be around collaborations, but how do you begin to develop those internally and externally, a culture of collaboration, so that this is something that's a part of who you are, a part of your organizational DNA. So when you need to execute partnership strategies, it's more fluid, not necessarily jarring. Real quick, just one story. I sit on a board of directors for a nonprofit organization, and we're actually in the search for a new executive director. And it was at the beginning of this search that staff and came to us and said, we need to think about a partnership with or merging with another organization. And that's too late. That needs to happen years prior to be able to put things in place so that collaboration or that partnership or that merger is successful. So we're going to look at the whole range of partnerships. We're going to look at the whole range or spectrum of collaborations today. So I just want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I am, like Melissa said, the Chief Collaborations Officer for Mission Plus Strategy Keystone Alliance. And I have more than 35 years of experience in nonprofits, leading as executive director many nonprofit organizations. And those range from startup, being a part of a startup process, all the way through to $30 million organizations, and all of the unique business challenges that that range of organizations provide. A real quick second about Mission Plus Strategy. We are actually a nonprofit organization providing strategic capacity building services to other nonprofit organizations. And all of our professionals in our practice all have deep experience in the nonprofit sector. So really being able to be key thought partners as leadership works through some really challenging business-related issues is really kind of where our focus is at. So I want to turn it over to Greg so he can do a quick introduction, and then we're going to ask all of you to introduce yourselves via some Slido questions.
Thanks, Judy, and Melissa and Big Buzz team. Thank you as well for inviting us. It's very good to be here, and I appreciate everybody hanging out and drinking some coffee. I think I hit my therapeutic level of caffeine in my bloodstream about an hour and a half ago, so I'm good to go. I'm a deep nonprofit nerd. I've been in the Chicago nonprofit field since 1995. For the last 20 years, I've been really proud to be part of the family of organizations that is Keystone Alliance. We're made up of groups that serve adults with intellectual and developmental disability diagnoses. And about a year ago, we acquired Mission Plus Strategy. Its founder was retiring, and if it were to go away, it would have left a gap in the collaborative space in the Chicago nonprofit field. So we came together a year ago. It's been a ton of fun. And as Judy said, not only are we, nonprofit folk ourselves, we've directly participated in, led, and facilitated many strategic collaborations to boot. So with that note, I think, time is of the essence, so we should probably boogie.
So in the chat, you should see a link to Slido, and we're going to ask you to, or you can take out your phone and take a picture of the QR code, and it'll take you right to this question. And we're looking to see kind of what the audience is like right now, and kind of what the makeup of our audience is, and kind of being able to gear the presentation a little bit more towards who our audience members are. And we're just going to give this a moment, and then we'll move on to the next question. So we've got some others and a few executive staff leadership. I'm going to move on to the next question. Diverse board member. Wonderful. It's a diverse group. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So this one, you can actually type in just a few words that describes who your target audience is for your organization? Who's your target client? Who are the people that you're serving? Just a couple of words again to kind of get us a little bit familiar with your organization. It's always fun learning a little bit more about who's in the audience and kind of what they're interested in. So it's wonderful. It's interesting, we've got someone who's representing a small business owner, and I think there's some interesting relationships, and Greg, you've got experience in this area in particular, between for-profit and non-for-profit organizations, and really this kind of line blurring between those two tax status designations, at least insofar as social impact.
We have bicyclists and pedestrians represented. Where are the drivers? We need bus drivers, we need pilots, and then we're covered. And we've got everybody.
All forms of transportation. So this is what we hope to accomplish today. We've got looking to have a kind of being able to understand what are some of the core challenges that is driving your organization, being able to understand where you're at on the collaborative spectrum, and then being able to have at least a couple of ideas or actionable steps you can take by the end of the session today. Oh, I forgot we had little highlights here.
You have guiding dots.
So one last question for you all, and just kind of share with us, aside from those objectives, is there anything else you'd love to be able to take away from today's session? So where you would say this was a good 45 to 50 minutes of your time spent? Just a couple of words about, again, narrative kind of answers, not multiple choice. What would be a good takeaway for you today? We want to make sure that this is worth your time. Balancing budgets with reality. That's a session in and of itself. How to enter a collaboration.
Ooh, MOU items to include. Somebody's neck deep.
Yep.
So Judy, every time we do one of these open-ended questions, I go back to our recent engagement where somebody put cheese.
Oh, that's right.
They were like, and I'm from Wisconsin, and so every time there's an open-ended question, I'm just like, cheese.
That's your new answer.
It's my love language. We have to figure out how to deliver that digitally, but that'll be a future goal.
That would be a feat. So I think you're up on deck next.
Yeah, so as context for the entire discussion, there's strategic collaborations. They take different forms, mergers, acquisitions. We'll talk about all of that. But our entire practice begins with the question of what challenge are we trying to address? And Judy, I think the top guys will populate in a second. You can just go ahead and populate them all. It's all good. And just as a little bit of a side note, there's this trope that because our tax status happens to be not-for-profit, that we're not good business folks. Due to the efforts of folks like Melissa and folks like, what we're doing at Keystone and Mission Plus Strategy, our opinion isn't that we're not good at it. It's that, again, we don't have the resources or the time to pull it through. In fact, I think the real truth is we do more with less than anybody in the history of mankind. It's like, okay, dude, I'd love to do like take your Fortune 500 CEO to work day and have them live a day in our shoes and see how long it takes until they poop themselves. Anyway, back to this, there's never been a time when we're not facing massive challenges. Judy thumbnailed a number of them. And again, these are more environmental. The things below the soil line are kind of the threats. The things above are opportunities that we're unable to take due to this extreme scarcity environment. And again, when you start thinking about what are the broad challenges facing your organization, that's the framework for what do we want to address with the collaboration. And it is very much our position, again, that being together with somebody provides the additional resources that are necessary to address the challenges that we all face. Because again, this is bigger than any single one of us. So if you don't mind clicking to the next one, Judy, would just like to hear from folks about what are the challenges that you're facing in your organization, whether you're, already down the collaborative process, like the person who's looking for MOU terms, or you're just saying, if I could wave a magic wand, I would want 1, 2, or 3 of these things to go away, or to have answers for it. Just curious to see what the audience's challenges are right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you. And this really resonates with, my experience and our experience of having been in the field for, something approaching 3 decades. And the fact that, again, these are at the core business concerns. And one of the things that I think is a gift about being in the field we all find ourselves in is that we do have a mission. And that mission helps us really organize and motivate folks to step up to these very large challenges that we're facing. For my organization, Keystone Alliance, we were born due to the top one. It was a succession planning consideration. The CEO of one of our orgs didn't have a successor in place, and so they sought a merger strategy, and that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. Judy has a story that she'll tell later where there were just barriers to providing the supports their population served needed. And so there was a merger strategy that formed around that. And there are many, many other reasons that are there. And this resonates very much with our experience. So Judy, if you don't mind clicking once more. This is what we see as, kind of the common reasons. And they group into 2 categories broadly. One is trading. So for example, in our organizations, we had 2 organizations that were coming together. And again, the initial discussion was merger. And for a variety of reasons, we went to a federated structure because of, again, that best addressed the challenges we were facing. But one organization was very strong at fundraising and external communications. One organization was very strong in the area of social enterprise and executing balance sheet strategies. So in this case, what we did is we migrated those to the other to help offset the corresponding weaknesses. So that's kind of the trading concept. In other cases, there are pooling strategies where we can do more just with 2 brains together in a room, or 2 sets of resources, or 2 teams focusing on exactly the same task than we could execute alone. And you can see how these might fit into the challenges that were stated on the preceding slide. The one thing that is, and I might be stealing thunder from your spectrum slide, Judy, but as she stated in the open, the right time to think about these things is as early as possible. Thinking that you're going to check a box, or, we're going to balance our budget through strategic collaboration. You can certainly engineer some efficiencies to reallocate resources elsewhere and or save some resources on the front end. But as a kind of saving strategy, we've seen that really not have efficacy and things of that nature. So we just wanted to share that perspective as well, that aligning this process with your strategic goals and challenges is what we see as a key success factor. So I believe this kind of is a mark between the challenges section, which is where everybody gets motivated and a little adrenalized, and then we'll talk about the collaborative spectrum next. So are there any I don't have visibility to the chat. Are there any questions in the chat that are related to the seemingly infinite amount of challenges we face when we walk into the office every morning?
We can give it just a minute. I'm not seeing anything posted. If anybody does have a question at this time, please put it in, but otherwise I think we can continue.
Very good.
The only thing I want to add to what you're saying, Greg, is I think that, people see collaborations as kind of like an end result or a thing in and of itself. And collaborations are a strategy to answer an organizational challenge. And so I think it's super important to consider, to first of all, really know what your organizational challenges you're trying to answer. And then what are all of the variety of ways to be able to, or all of the variety of strategies to be able to address that challenge. Because if you choose a collaborative strategy or a partnership strategy, I will guarantee you there will be time in that process. You're going to say, this is not worth it. I want to quit. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too heavy of a lift. You will feel all of these, really awful emotions and really great emotions. And it's the North Star of why you're doing this that will keep you sustained through the process. So it's why we lead off these kinds of presentations with, what is your organizational challenge you're trying to solve, for you to then think about collaboration as a strategy to solve that. So it's funny when we do these kind of presentations, it always makes you kind of go back to what are the basics and like how you even understand the word collaboration. And really, it's the collaboration is the act of producing something. It's a co-creative act. And it's where you're knowing that if we come together, we can create something better than if we were to do that alone. And our position is that any of these big challenges require a collaborative strategy in order to answer that challenge. So with that in mind, then, if this is about how do we work together, you can't just like flip a switch and go, okay, now we're going to work together. It's what are the values we bring with us? How am I as a leader with regards to collaboration? What kind of past baggage do I have, right? Have I partnered with another organization to do something and did that go poorly? And how do I resolve that and be able to try again at a collaboration? So I think it's important to look at internal and external factors when we're thinking about collaboration. And again, we want to drive home this idea that collaboration is not a destination. It's not just a one spot. There's really like this spectrum that we've particularly, and I'm going to just click a few times here and move through all this wonderful animation. But this is the spectrum of, on the left-hand side, we're really more about competing. And right now we want to just kind of have you think about this in relationship to external relationships, right? So who do you work with externally, not internally yet? Are you actively competing with one another for resources? And unfortunately, funding for nonprofits sets up this dynamic that we are competing with one another because we're competing with one another for grant applications. And so it's very easy for us, because it's already a part of our landscape, to think about each other as competitors versus partners. And that's a hard mentality for any of us to be able to shift away from. So it's the actively competing for grants on the left-hand side, the going it alone. So for example, I know of some of my past experience has been working or leading an organization that's in the domestic violence space. At the time, there was another housing provider. So we provided emergency shelter and transitional housing. At the time, there was a organization that provided services for those who are homeless. And they decided to enter into providing housing for victims of domestic violence. And they did that without any kind of coordination, conversation with us. And so that's an example of going it alone, right? Not leveraging expertise within the community. And I think, again, because there's this mentality that we're competing with each other for funding. So those are some examples of being on that far left-hand side of the continuum. And then all the way on the right-hand side is the integration, merged as if one organization. And again, for me, the example that I draw on, or one example that I draw on, is leading the merger between the domestic violence agency I led and our number one referral source. Our North Star, our organizational challenge we were trying to resolve was removing barriers for victims of domestic violence. So just really quickly, domestic violence laws in the state of Illinois are just so restrictive that it makes it very difficult for staff to coordinate services. And so to enter into a partnership with one of our number one referral sources was enabled us to have a spectrum of services from early childhood education to longer term mental health supports to civil legal support, and really be able to provide a spectrum of services quickly to our clients. And so our North Star was removing barriers, and we we integrated with our number one referral source. And that really required a lot of trust as we went along, from this, we're competing with our referral source, to we need to really partner with our referral source. I don't know if, Greg, there's anything you want to add to that?
I wanted to address, we have a comment in the chat from Trisha, and
Yeah.
it is, you can help us present next time, because you use one of my favorite words. The comment from Trisha is, collaboration is clearly valuable, but takes an investment of time.
Absolutely.
Investment is the correct word. And a lot of people feel like, oh, it's a waste of time, or I'm spending time. And it's semantics, but I really feel like viewing this as an investment of time, attention, and energy is how I think about it, is the only way to put it. And it's a shift. We're always so busy. Every single nonprofit has almost infinitely more work than time. And often the result of that is you can never separate from working in the business. I'm bald because I wore too many hats previously in my life. The notion is, can you create the time to step back and work on the business? And that's where, when you move to the right-hand side of the spectrum, you're able to do that. And there's no way to understate it. It does take an investment of time. It can be a big hurdle. You asked a question about how to make the division of labor equitable between the collaborators when time is already a scarce commodity. We can talk more about that. That's a little bit of a deeper dive into some processes that we run. But that is a very real question, a very real concern, and a corollary to which is, not only is it an investment of time, it's an investment of resources. And we will talk more about that, but that is an excellent point, Trisha. Thank you for putting that in the chat.
So I want to ask you guys, where are you at on the collaboration spectrum? And be really honest. We're not going to be able to see any names with this, but just be really honest with yourself. Where do you fall? Are you on more of that right now, the left-hand side, where you're actively competing? Or have you participated in more formal mergers, more formal partnerships?
And while folks are answering this, I'll take another second to address the division of labor and investment of time and attention. So what we've seen is most effective is, the strategic collaboration process, which can be a merger, acquisition, federated structure, it can be whatever is best to address the challenges that we discussed earlier. But it's a structured process, and it begins very thoughtfully around who are the stakeholders, who we want to be involved. And again, that answer depends on the challenge set that you're trying to address. And then being deliberate in the beginning about the big elephants in the room questions, i.e., let's say we want to merge or acquire, who's going to be in charge on the other side of this? And hitting those earlier than later, because the last thing you want to do is invest all this time and then be like, "Ooh, deal breaker, I'm out." Things of that nature. The other aspect of it is, like Judy said in the introductory comments, this is a bit of a roller coaster for us as humans, because there are going to be surprises along the way. So obviously we do this as a consultancy from the nonprofit perspective. So you can always hang out with us and we'll help you navigate, but it's working on the relationship between the organizations and between the leaders that we see as the core success factors, so that you can have the conversations and say, hey, you know what? I feel like my team is really burning it at both ends to contribute to this, and I'm not seeing the deliverables from your side enter into our shared file system, or whatever it is. So that way, if you think things are going a little wobbly, you have the language and the to address things in a respectful manner.
And this is kind of getting into a slide that we've got coming up, but we're on this topic. I think there's a lot of internal culture work that may need to be done so that you're ready to be able to have successful collaborations. And part of that internal culture work might be around, how are we about conflict? How are we about differing opinions? How are we about being direct and honest in our communication in a respectful way? And if your organization doesn't do that, then I think collaborations are going to be really difficult, and you can set yourself up for some big challenges. So, being able to talk about those legacy issues that Greg said, and being fearless about being able to raise who's going to be in charge and what does your organization need and want in this partnership, and being able to be very direct, and also being able to set up your expectations. How are we going to be together? And that if one of the partners violates that expectation, how do you again respectfully hold each other accountable? So I think there's some very important emotional and social intelligence that has to happen, and it has to also be something that is within your organization.
And as an example, if I had a time machine, I would go back to when we were going through the Keystone process, because we were hardcore laser beamed on the structure. This is the technical exercise. This is what's going to be happening, so on and so forth. And the relationships were strong, but we didn't focus on them as an area of investment. And, there were things that we've learned. I mean, we've now been a family for 15 years, but just like any family, like all of a sudden things bubble up. And there was a discussion about organization A or B, its team thought, we're going to win in this deal. We're going to come out the winners. And I wish we'd been able to have that conversation in a room of leadership early, so that that message gets reframed to the people who win in this are those we have the privilege of serving, period, point blank, end of story. And because those little ripples are still reverberating. Our deal went down in 2009, and we're privileged to have a lot of long tenured people, but there's still those little things. Oh, well, you guys own us now, or this happened. It's like, bah. So an example of what can come up if you don't focus. I'm like the don't do this example, and Judy's like the do this example, by the way. So that's kind of how it works going forward.
I have a quick question for you, because what you're saying is so important. And I think nonprofit culture comes through in so many different ways. And really kind of like knowing thyself and asking the tough questions are both like two pieces of that. If an organization is struggling with that, is that something that Mission Plus Strategy can assist with, that part of the process? If they need a little bit of help, if they need an independent third party, is that something they can come to you for?
Yeah, actually, we do culture analysis work. We actually have a kind of I can't, the word is escaping me. I have not had enough caffeine this morning. It's a,
Assessment.
validated instrument. Thank you. Um, so we'll use that assessment to be able to kind of understand what the culture is of an organization and then be able to work with the organization to develop a plan to begin to change to the preferred culture and move towards a preferred culture. And so all of that kind of work takes time before you start moving into a partnership. We probably worked on, at the organization I was at, we probably worked on culture for 3 years, I think, before we were ready to really think about entering into a partnership. We had some unhealthy kinds of behaviors that we needed to change as an organization.
I think that that's really valuable because I just know, right? Sometimes it's the staff and the board don't always see eye to eye, sometimes
Yep,
kind of trying to bring everybody along or to
yep,
change kind of that archaic process that maybe has existed for years. And so the independent third party, I think, can be a really valid support in that
yeah.
process. And I love talking about the timeline. So thank you both for sharing.
Yeah, well, and I think you raise a really good point, right? Because I think it's, this is about alignment. The being able to have a successful collaboration, whatever depth you're going to have that collaboration, is about alignment every step of the way. And that takes conversation, and it takes somebody who necessarily doesn't have an interest in this to help um, keep focused on the North Star, to help kind of keep, you know, for, directly egos in check, because even the most self-aware of us, we're human beings, and so we're going to have ego moments. I mean, there's definitely times in my journey through our collaboration where I was grateful I had an executive coach to help keep me and my ego in check and focus on what was going to be best for our clients. I'm going to move to the next slide, and just real quick, if you want to answer, where do you think your organization is? It's often that the leaders are actually more kind of ahead of things, right? Because that's why you're the leader. You're always out looking for that next opportunity, that next thing that you can bring into the organization. And so many times our leaders are maybe more collaborative than the rest of the organization. So just real quick, if you could answer, where do you see your organization on the collaboration spectrum? And then we're going to look at the spectrum and how this relates internally and talk more about culture work. So kind of like leaders, it looks like there's a lot of folks that are on the right side of the spectrum, which is wonderful.
And Judy, just as a time note, thanks to the questions and discussion, we're probably about 5 minutes behind schedule, but it's all good. No. I just want to make sure that you were aware. We said we were going to be each other's timekeepers. So, that's awesome.
Yeah.
The next breakfast
Nice.
club should just be like, how are we going to save the world? Because we're all working together. Let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to look at the same spectrum, but I want you to think about this as your internal culture. And so where is your internal culture insofar as collaboration? So the organization that I walked into, we actually had departments that were actively competing with one another for resources. So the process was you would go see the CFO. The CFO would decide if you got whatever you wanted money for or not. And many times that was based on the personal relationship between the CFO and the other department. And it really put people in this position, or departments in the position of actively competing with one another to get resources. And there was this concerted effort of moving the organization to be much more collaborative. If we were going to be collaborative internal or externally, we needed to be collaborative internally. And so we really moved towards this place of being able to divert resources to different departments depending on when and how they needed them. And so, the housing department might give up some resources financially and people in order to staff mental health if we were running a little bit short on staff insofar as that crisis mental health piece. And so think that we had book clubs in the organization, particularly with the leadership team. And some of our favorite books were like reading a lot of business books. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, Crucial Conversations was huge. The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. These were Leaders Eat Last. That was a Simon Sinek book. All of these things that really were around kind of this being able to put the organization first, being able to put the clients first, and being able to be very humble in your leadership and see that as a two-way kind of street and almost shared decision making and shared power. You look like you have something you want to add.
Well, just I mean,
Yeah.
things to look for on a like day-to-day level are, would you describe your organization as being siloed? That's a word that's used very commonly. And so if that's the case, or even just the vibe, you're leaning a little bit more towards the left. Are people using us and them language?
Mhm.
This is our family of organizations, like I said, serve adults with developmental disabilities. And I think I saw somebody else who has solo homes. We have a lot of homes, and in our world, there's kind of community day services, and employment is kind of over here, and then residential's over here. And it's always trying to position the other one as kind of the weaker partner, like, oh, we did our job, but they didn't do their job. And that's human nature. And then it's how do you create space around that and try to move things more to the right? Because when things work together, again, we have way better outcomes and results for the people we're here to serve.
I think one last thing about this slide in the interest of time, and it piggybacks on what you're saying, Greg, is storytelling is very powerful in an organization. What stories are being told in your organization? Is it more of what kind of like Greg was saying, where it's kind of like, we won this, or, kind of a boasting, or is it more, are your shared stories more around, maybe it's how, one department was able to help out another department. Storytelling is a really important signal and symptom of what your culture is like. So I'm going to just jump to this collaborative mindset.
Do you mind clicking through these? Because these animate. And again, this is exactly what I was saying about kind of some of the language. And we're at 9:45. So we're, again, catching up a little bit on time, and we want to leave 5 or 10 minutes for additional questions in the chat. But these are additional facets of what we describe as a collaborative mindset. And again, it's Judy talked about a lot of different titles that kind of put the ego or the identity of the organization before the identity of the leader. I go back to a Jim Henson quote when he was doing the Muppets. That's I identify with Muppets. And he was like, a good director takes on the ego of the production and the ego of what the art is that's being created. And again, that's kind of the golden thread behind everything on the right-hand side. One thing that's interesting for yourself as a leader is, what language do you use? Is it your team? Do you use possessive terms? And I'm not saying this in a challenging way, like you suck because you say it's my team. People do that all the time. You got to get through the day and not use a million words, but what's the default? Those things are signals. And is it more of a collective collaborative language set that you're using? So this is kind of the mindset concept put rather broadly. There are a couple questions around how you as a leader communicate, how you listen, and how you approach inclusive and collaborative decision making that follow this. So Judy, if you don't mind hitting those Slidos, and we can kind of talk about.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is more of answering this question necessarily than just kind of reflecting on it again, just in the interest of time.
Absolutely.
But I think there's these next 3 slides are some kind of like, what are those key kind of emotional intelligence skills and social intelligence skills to be a collaborator. So this is like the straightforward communication. And again, in my experience, I've both worked for and consulted with organizations where you've got this center point of communication, and it encourages people to go to that center point of communication versus going directly to the person someone has the issue with, right? And being able to talk directly with that person. And so what is your communication strategy, style, process like? And really this needing to be straightforward in the communication, being clear about expectations, holding other people accountable when those expectations are violated or not upheld. Violated can be a very strong word. So being clear about how do you communicate and where might you need to improve communication for you and your organization. And again, I'm just going to keep going on to this. And if you guys want to answer, that's wonderful. Listening to understand and then respond. Like many times we listen in order to be able to prepare our response versus I'm going to understand you first and then I'm going to be understood. I think that was an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. First understand and then be understood. And for leaders, particularly at the CEO or executive director level, this idea of be vulnerable first, like share your mistakes first, but share your opinions last. Give space for people to be able to hear what they have to say, and then you can share yours last, because as the leader, if you share first, that's going to influence what everybody is thinking and saying. They're going to just fall in line, in many cases, follow you.
Judy, you used an important word, vulnerability there. I think this entire process includes healthy amounts and humbling amounts of vulnerability, because you're really, again, the process as it works, you kind of have an exploratory kind of partnership feasibility phase, and that results in one quasi-legal non-binding document. And then the person who was asking questions about the MOU, going from the letter of intent to the MOU, there are a bunch of technical nerds in the form of auditors, lawyers, and things like that who are digging through everything. And you want to make sure there are no surprises. You want to be disclosing as much as you can in kind of the pre-LOI phase, but that notion of vulnerability and just being real about these are our challenges, because newsflash, Jack, nobody's perfect. No organization is perfect. And that's why we're coming together. So being able to be authentically vulnerable in this process, I think, is another key element of success. And I think we might have hit some fatigue. Oh, Trisha. Oh, MOU. Sorry, memorandum of understanding. I am really addicted to
LOI.
LOI. Oh, letter
of intent.
I don't think I used any others.
Yeah.
So there's that.
So again, just real quick on this one, another one of those social skills is around being able to have more of a shared decision making, while the buck always stops with the CEO or the executive director. People really like to be able to have a voice in and have influence in decisions that will impact them. And so while it's not necessarily deferring or abdicating authority, it is how do you pull in more voices to make the best decision. I'm going to kind of go through this last slide super quick. We've got skills on one side. Those are actual habits to practice. The capacity is, what is your capacity to be able to handle uncertainty, or empathy, or your own self-reflection? Those are more capacities within a person. And really all of those we've talked about to some degree in this presentation so far. And really this being able to be comfortable with the unknown as you move through this process, because it's very organic, I think is really important in a collaboration. I want to make sure, Greg, we have some time in the Q&A to be able to at least talk a little bit more about those three areas that people wanted to have more information about on MOUs. How do you enter into a collaboration, and right timing were some of those goals that I saw. So you talked a little bit about MOU. Some common MOUs come after the letter of intent. So letter of intent is going to outline some big conditions for you guys to have, for two partners to be working through as you plan for a merger. So some of those big issues are going to be like those legacy issues. What name of the organization survives? Who's going to be leading the new organization? So kind of that high level leadership structure. What does the board configuration look like? Those are going to be named in the LOI. Then in the MOU, you're going to have more detail. You're going to talk about the, maybe that's the payroll system that's going to, you know, be the one that is for the entire organization. Maybe it's going to be around fundraising or pay and HR manual information. So it's going to be much more detailed than those really big rocks of the LOI. So it really spells out kind of what is being integrated and how after the closing documents are signed.
I think
yeah.
Just another example, because it is, I think that's the best way to characterize it, Judy, is kind of the LOI is more on the why and what, and then the MOU gets down to the what and the how and is defining terms. So you asked what are some terms that we think are good ones to include. The board governance terms, you know, kind of the bylaws level things. How many people sit? When we formed Keystone Alliance, it was Glenkirk, which is where I'm hanging out right now, and then Search, which is a provider in the city and in northern suburbs. And we prescribe board membership and how it comes from each organization, who sits in the chair. All of those things were literally copied out of the MOU and plopped into our bylaws. We had some other complications around articles of incorporation, things of that nature. It's again a little bit more work planning. One thing that we see as a late stage hurdle, and it's usually a surprise that's really unpleasant, is contracts. So funding contracts. Okay, we're thinking we're going to merge, and by merge, like I'm going to acquire organization A and just subsume it into organization B. A lot of times our funding partners do not want to see that. And so we've seen a handful of large kind of merger style collaborations either pause or sometimes even fall apart due to that. Yeah. Again, those notions of board control and how the makeup looks on the far side, there have been examples of that where, you know, I often go to kind of the relationship analogy, and this is a lot like a marriage. We've seen some really otherwise awesome, fascinating, and high impact collaborations kind of fall apart at the altar because those terms weren't as defined. And to what Judy was saying earlier on the communication front, it's an example of making sure everybody's with the leadership. I guarantee you they achieved a consensus with a group of people here, and I was not in the room for any of this. The deal I'm talking about was not a Mission Plus strategy deal, but this group had consensus, and then when it expanded out to additional critical stakeholders, I have a very strong gut feeling that the consensus was not present, and that's where things got wobbly. Yeah. So those are the things that tie together in that phase.
So the other goal for someone was like, how do you enter into a collaboration? And so since I started off on the last one, Greg, I'll have you start off on that one, if you don't mind.
Do you like beer, or do you like cheese, or do you like food? But it can take a lot of different forms. And what we've seen a lot in our direct experience at Mission Plus Strategy is partners are kind of there in your natural environment. They're folks who you might pick up the phone and call to say, how are you guys addressing this challenge? Maybe they're people in your space. Maybe they're people who you've come across in your networking activities. You can engage groups like us to do a formal partnership search where you brainstorm a list of criteria that says, this is what we want to work with in terms of organization size, type, location, population served. And then we actually can either facilitate that conversation. We're exploring partnership opportunities on behalf of the client organization, or the client organization can do that on their own. I think a corollary to the question of how you start partnership conversations is also if I'm a leader, how do I bring the board along? I think that's a really critical area of vulnerability in this, because if I see something that's a need and to address collaboratively, there's a challenge there. Is my board aligned with me on that challenge, and is the leadership team? Because, you know, that could be a surprise point, and that's a surprise to be avoided. So I think that's another area of kind of partnership and exploration that I would urge be thought about in the early phases.
I know we're at time. I just want to add two quick things to that. I think, you know, starting a collaboration really starts internally, and having the conversations internally with key staff. We had it on our strategic plan from the moment I walked in the door as the new executive director, and probably started actually having deep conversations around collaborations with other partners 5 years into my tenure. So it was on the strategic plan for 5 years before we actually began to execute it, which gave us time clearly to talk about it internally. And then the other strategy that we employed, to get to your point, Greg, about the board, is we actually had one of our deepest naysayers for a collaboration actually sit on the team that was going to plan the collaboration. So it really moved him from being the skeptic to being a really big champion, because he was included in that process. And we didn't try to quiet his voice. We actually encouraged to hear it so we could have a thoughtful decision process. So we are at our time. Thank you, Melissa, so much for this opportunity to be able to be with your group today. We really enjoyed the time.
Thank you both very much. So much great content and information to think about, and just really to be able to do the work internally, so you're ready to continue to look about the sustainability of your organization. So thank you for being our guest today, and we wish everybody a wonderful day.